My mother chose this public cage to shatter my future, just like she had the last time. She picked the corner booth of the Daily Grind, her favorite cafe, the same one from my past life's nightmare. The location was a strategic calculation, a place where my screams would be muffled by the hiss of the espresso machine and my tears diluted by social propriety. The bitter aroma of burnt coffee beans filled the air, a scent I now associated with betrayal. It couldn't mask the metallic taste of dread that used to flood my mouth. But this time was different. There was no dread, only a cold, thrilling calm. "Sally, honey," she began, her voice a little too bright. She fidgeted with the diamond on her wedding ring, twisting it again and again. An old tell. "We need to talk about your college fund." The words hung in the air, identical to the ones that had destroyed me before. In my first life, my world had imploded. Panic clawed at my throat, my hands trembled so hard, I'd knocked over my water glass. I had felt my future, the one I had bled and sacrificed for, crumbling into dust. But this reborn version of me simply smiled. A slow, steady curve of my lips that didn't quite reach my eyes. My heart was a war drum, beating a patient, rhythmic countdown. I already knew the script, every line, every pause, every fake tear, and I had rewritten the ending. My lack of a hysterical reaction made her nervous. Her own smile faltered. Her eyes, the same shade of blue as my own, darted around the cafe, landing everywhere but on me. She was trembling. "Good." "It's about Sandy," she finally managed, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Of course it was. It was always about Sandy. My adopted sister, the eternal damsel in distress, the black hole that consumed all light and money in our family. I said nothing. I just sipped my latte. It was lukewarm, the foam dissolving into a sad little film. I let the silence stretch, letting her stew in the discomfort of her own treachery. But then, the bell above the cafe door jingled violently. Sandy burst in, a Category 5 hurricane of manufactured drama. She wore a ridiculously expensive trench coat, artfully rumpled, and designer boots that clicked in urgent staccato against the worn linoleum tiles. Her eyes, framed by smudges of dark makeup that were meant to look like sleepless nights, scanned the room with practiced desperation. "Mom!" she cried, her voice cracking with the precision of a trained actress. "I'm so sorry I'm late. The investors, they pulled out. At the last minute, they just left." She staggered toward our table, one hand clutching her chest as if to keep her fragile heart from escaping. It was a masterful performance. I had to give her that. In my first life, I'd been consumed by a wave of misplaced sympathy. Poor Sandy, I had thought. She tries so hard. Now I felt nothing but a profound, liberating emptiness. The space where my love for her used to be was now a hollowed-out cavern, ready to be filled with the sweet echoes of revenge. Mom's face crumbled just as it had before. Pure maternal panic etched lines around her mouth. She shot up from her seat, knocking her chair back slightly, and wrapped her arms around Sandy. "Oh, my baby girl," she cooed, stroking Sandy's hair. "It's okay. It's all going to be okay. We'll figure something out." They stood there, locked in a tableau of maternal comfort, completely excluding me. I was just a spectator to their drama, the silent financier of their shared life. I took another slow sip of my latte, the bitter taste a welcome anchor in this sea of fiction. I felt a cold anticipation curl in my gut. The next part of the script required the enforcer. However, right on cue, the door opened again. This time, it was my father. He slid into the booth, the worn leather squeaking in protest under his weight. He brought with him the scent of sawdust and Old Spice, the smells of my childhood now tainted by association. His face was a mask of grave authority, his jaw set. "We think Sandy deserves another chance," he said, his voice low and heavy. He didn't look at me. He looked at a point just over my shoulder, as if addressing a board meeting. This was the moment, the grand proposal. Sandy, her crocodile tears miraculously drying up, slid into the seat beside me. Her hand, surprisingly cold, reached for mine across the sticky tabletop. I didn't pull away. "Sally," she whispered, her voice husky with emotion. Her fingers, covered in trendy silver rings, squeezed mine. I could feel the calluses from her latest obsession, a hot yoga certification she'd abandoned after 2 weeks. You're so smart. You're so capable. You got into Stanford. She said the name of my dream school as if it were a minor accomplishment, a little hobby I could pick up again anytime. You'll find another way to pay for it, a scholarship, a loan. You always land on your feet. Her eyes bored into mine, pleading, manipulative. But this business idea? It's different this time, Sally. I can feel it. It's going to change everything for us. It's a sure thing. The air crackled with their collective expectation. The pressure was immense, a physical weight pressing down on me. In my first life, I had shattered under it. I had cried. I had argued. I had listed all the sacrifices I'd made, the straight A's, the all-nighters, the life I had put on hold. And in the end, I had caved because they were my family. This time I felt a surge of power. Their desperation was a current, and I was learning how to ride it. I let my own expression soften, mimicking a deep, painful resignation. I let a single, perfect tear well in my eye, a masterpiece of my own acting. "Of course," I whispered, my voice thick with false sorrow. I squeezed her hand back. "Family first." The relief in the booth was palpable. Mom let out a shaky breath she'd been holding. Dad gave a curt, satisfied nod. Sandy's face broke into a radiant, triumphant smile. They were so easy to fool. Their guilt made them blind. Like a well-rehearsed magic trick, the paperwork appeared. Dad pulled a crisp manila folder from his briefcase. Inside were bank forms, transfer documents, and a legal waiver dissolving my claim to my college fund. 18 years of saved birthday money, Christmas gifts from relatives, and earnings from my own part-time jobs. My entire future condensed into 3 pages of soulless legal jargon. Dad slid the folder across the table. "We need you to sign here and here." Mom's hand hovered over her own pen. Her conscience was making one last feeble stand. "You're absolutely sure about this, sweetheart?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Once we sign, there's no going back." I met her gaze. I held it. I didn't want her to miss the moment she sealed her fate alongside mine. I gave her a slow, deliberate nod. The flicker of hurt in her eyes was my first taste of victory. It was delicious. She signed, her signature a spidery scrawl of guilt. Then Dad. Then they all looked at me. The pen was in my hand. The weight of it felt different now, not like a shackle, but a weapon. I ignored the documents for a moment, pulling out my phone instead. A deliberate act of disrespect. I opened my calendar, my movements calm and unhurried while their world hung in the balance. Their eyes followed my every move. They thought I was hesitating, second-guessing. They had no idea I was simply confirming an appointment. My thumb swiped across the screen. 3:15 p.m., call from Michael Lawson. Michael Lawson was the business partner from Sandy's last failed venture, the one she swore had run off with all the money. In a few minutes, he would be calling my father, armed with a mountain of evidence I had anonymously provided, to discuss the embezzlement charges he was planning to file against Sandy. I glanced at the time at the top of my phone's screen. 2:28 p.m. 47 minutes until detonation. I uncapped the pen. The small click echoed in the sudden silence. My hand didn't tremble as I signed my name, extinguishing the dream of Stanford with a single fluid stroke. I pushed the papers back toward the center of the table. A satisfied sigh went through my family. They thought they had won. They thought the story was over, but the real story was just beginning. And this time, I was the one holding the pen. A cold, victorious smile finally touched my eyes. How would they react, I wondered, when they realized the money they'd just stolen from me was the very last cent they'd ever see? The fireworks I'd planned for my family went off exactly on schedule. The phone call from Michael Lawson sent my father into a spiral of rage and panic. Sandy's tearful, nonsensical denials only dug her deeper into a hole of her own making. Listening to the screaming match over the phone later that night, I felt a grim satisfaction. It was the overture to a symphony of chaos I was composing just for them. They were so consumed with Sandy's immediate legal disaster, the one I had engineered, that they forgot all about me. They assumed I was broken, grieving the loss of my Stanford dream. They were wrong. I was simply gathering my strength because I knew the attacks were far from over. My family was just the heart of the rot. The decay had spread to every corner of my life. The next morning, the university library was my sanctuary, but even here the assault continued. The air, thick with the scent of old paper and anxiety, felt heavy and suffocating. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sterile, unforgiving glare on the rows of books I could no longer afford to even dream about. I was trying to research community college courses when a shadow fell over my table. Sally, oh my God, I heard what happened. It was Jessica, my best friend. Her nails, a perfect glossy crimson, drummed a rapid, irritating rhythm against the polished mahogany. It was a sound of feigned impatience, of someone with better things to do than console the unfortunate. I am so sorry about Stanford, she whispered, her voice dripping with a sympathy so fake it was almost oily. It's fine, I said, not looking up from my book. My voice was flat, devoid of the emotion she was so clearly hoping to see. I refused to give her the satisfaction of my pain. Her drumming stopped. My disinterest threw her off script. Well, she said, recovering quickly. I mean, it's a shame, but honestly? She leaned in closer, her expensive perfume invading my space. Maybe it's for the best. You were never really Stanford material. The words sliced deep, an echo of a past wound. In my previous life, that sentence had shattered my confidence for years. I had believed her, internalizing her cruelty as truth. A wave of that old, familiar hurt washed over me, a phantom pain that made my chest tighten. I felt a tremor start in my hands, but then the new me rose up. A cold, hard wall of resolve. I slowly lifted my gaze from the page and met her eyes. I didn't say a word. I just stared, letting my silence stretch. I watched the smug certainty in her face curdle into confusion, then discomfort. She started to fidget, the hunter suddenly feeling like the prey. Anyway, she stammered, standing up abruptly. I've got to run. Let me know if you need anything. I watched her walk away, her hips swaying with practiced confidence. She thought she'd landed a killing blow. She had no idea she'd just confirmed her place on my list. However, the betrayals kept coming, layered one on top of the other. That evening, the rain came down in sheets, drumming a relentless rhythm against the windows of the campus bookstore where I worked. The sound was mournful, a perfect soundtrack for my life. The bell on the door chimed, and in walked Marcus, the star quarterback, the man whose poster had hung on my wall in high school, my hopeless, all-consuming crush. Of course, he chose tonight to appear. His broad shoulders seemed to fill the entire doorway, water droplets clinging to his dark, perfectly messy hair. He looked like a hero from a movie, and my stomach churned with a nauseating mix of old adoration and new contempt. Hey, Sally, he said, his voice a low, smooth baritone. He leaned against the counter, his proximity a casual invasion of my personal space. The air filled with the scent of rain and his expensive cologne. Heard you had a rough break about college, he continued, his expression a careful mix of pity and concern. I just nodded, my fingers tightening on the scanner in my hand. People are talking. Yeah, Jessica mentioned it. His eyes roamed over me, a flicker of something calculating in their depths. She said you might need some support. He let the word hang in the air. I've got a pretty generous allowance, he said, his voice dropping even lower. I could help out with tuition, books, whatever you need. If you wanted to, spend more time together. His hand slid across the counter, his fingers brushing against mine. The touch was meant to be reassuring, but it felt like a brand, a transaction. The cash register beeped, finalizing a sale for another customer. The electronic sound was stark, clinical. It perfectly punctuated his indecent proposal. He was offering to buy me. Just like my parents, just like Jessica, he saw my tragedy as his opportunity. The realization was a cold slap, liberating me from the last vestiges of my schoolgirl crush. I looked at his hand, then back at his handsome, expectant face. And for the second time that day, I offered a small, enigmatic smile. I'll think about it, Marcus, I said, my voice smooth as ice. The confusion on his face was a small, satisfying victory. He expected tears, gratitude, or an angry rejection. He didn't know what to do with calm consideration, but then the attacks became more direct, more desperate. My sister, having failed to secure bail money from our frantic parents, turned her sights back on me. She appeared at my apartment door at midnight, a wraith in the flickering, ghoulish light of the hallway. Mascara ran in black rivers down her cheeks, a piece of abstract art titled Desperation. "I need more money, Sally," she whimpered the second I opened the door. There was no preamble, no apology, just pure, uncut entitlement. The business registration fees were higher than expected, and now these lawyer bills. Her voice carried that familiar wheedling tone that had always worked on me, a sound designed to pry open my wallet and my heart. Over her shoulder, parked under a lone streetlight, I saw it, her brand new BMW. The one she'd bought 2 weeks ago with the first withdrawal from my college fund. It gleamed, pristine, and perfect. A monument to my sacrifice and her greed, a cold, hard rage settled in my chest. It wasn't hot and explosive, but dense and heavy, like a block of dry ice. "I know you have savings from your job," she pressed on, oblivious to the storm gathering behind my eyes. "Just a small loan, a few thousand. I'll pay you back, I swear, as soon as the profits start rolling in." I looked at her tear-streaked face, at the expensive handbag dangling from her arm, and then back at the car my future had paid for. I felt nothing. No pity, no love. Just the cold, clear focus of an assassin lining up a shot. I let out a long, weary sigh, a performance of defeat. "Okay, Sandy," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Let me get my checkbook." She thought I was a pushover, an endless well of forgiveness and cash. She didn't understand. I wasn't giving her a loan. I was funding her downfall. The final piece of the coordinated assault came, as it always did, disguised as love. Sunday dinner was a battlefield masquerading as a family meal. The dining room filled with the rich, comforting aroma of Mom's pot roast, a scent she weaponized to signify home and tradition, and "you owe us." "You seem distant lately, Sally," Dad observed, carving the roast with methodical, violent precision. Each slice of the knife felt like a personal cut. "Sandy's really trying her best," he continued, not looking at me. "She's under so much pressure to succeed. The least you could do is be more supportive." Mom nodded vigorously, her hands trembling as she passed me the mashed potatoes. "We're all making sacrifices here, Sally. This legal trouble is hard on all of us. Your negativity isn't helping anyone." Their words were a masterclass in gaslighting. They painted me as the problem, my distance, my negativity. They had stolen my future, and now they were angry that I wasn't smiling about it. The pressure in the room was suffocating. I could feel the old instincts flaring up, the urge to scream, to defend myself, to list their every crime. Instead, I took a bite of potato. I chewed slowly. I swallowed. "You're right," I said, my voice unnervingly calm. "Families should support each other." My placid agreement unnerved them far more than any argument could have. The final blow came on Friday. My last refuge, my small measure of independence, was about to be obliterated. My boss, Mrs. Henderson, called me into her office. The small, windowless space reeked of stale cigarettes and quiet desperation. A manila folder sat on her desk between us. "Sally, I'm sorry," she said, her eyes fixed on the folder. She couldn't look at me. "We've had some complaints about your customer service." She pushed the folder toward me. It contained 3 letters, all typed, all anonymous, detailing fabricated stories of my rudeness and incompetence. Through the glass partition of her office, I could see Jessica. She was chatting with the assistant manager, her head thrown back in laughter. The sound was sharp, like broken glass. The setup was so simple, so elegant in its cruelty. Eliminate my income. Force me to depend on the very people who were destroying me. Maintain the cycle of exploitation. "I'm going to have to let you go," Mrs. Henderson mumbled, finally looking up. Her eyes were filled with a mixture of pity and guilt. "I'm so sorry." They had systematically dismantled my life, piece by piece, believing they were leaving me with nothing. My future, my best friend, my financial independence, my dignity, all gone. They thought they were cornering a mouse, They had no idea they'd just armed a tiger. They believed they had left me with nothing. But what they didn't know was that with every piece they took, I was forging a new one in the fires of my rage. How could they possibly predict what I would do now that I had nothing left to lose? Losing my job was the last straw. They had taken my future, my friends, and now my livelihood. They thought they had backed me into a corner, leaving me with no choice but to crawl back to them, utterly dependent and broken. They were about to learn how wrong they were. An animal backed into a corner doesn't surrender. It fights. My first target was Sandy. Her new business, a pyramid scheme disguised as a spiritual wellness brand selling overpriced meditation crystals, was already failing spectacularly. It collapsed within a month. I came home one afternoon to find her sitting on the floor of my tiny, threadbare apartment. She was surrounded by shimmering heaps of amethyst, rose quartz, and citrine. The cheap stones caught the afternoon light, filtering through my grimy windows, scattering pathetic rainbows across the peeling paint of my walls. The air smelled of her cloying floral perfume and something else, the metallic tang of failure. She had been weeping, but the tears were gone now, replaced by a hardened, demanding glint in her eyes. She had $30,000 in debt to shady lenders and a garage full of useless, unsellable rocks. "It wasn't my fault," she began, tracing patterns in the dusty carpet. "The market was just saturated." I remained silent, letting her spin her narrative of victimhood. "I need your help," she said, finally looking at me. The request came without an ounce of shame. "I need to borrow against your car, Sally, just for a little while, just until I can liquidate this inventory. My car, my 10-year-old Honda, the one thing of value I had left in the world, it was my freedom, my escape, and she wanted it." The familiar knot of rage twisted in my stomach, cold and sharp. This was the wrong she would regret. This was the mistake that would unravel everything for her. I let my shoulders slump, my face a mask of weary resignation. "Of course, Sandy," I said, my voice soft with defeat. "Whatever you need." But then, we met at a greasy diner for the transaction. The air hung heavy with the smell of stale coffee and fried onions, a fitting aroma for the theater of lies we were performing. Mom and Dad were there, playing the roles of proud, supportive parents. They beamed as I pulled my car keys from my pocket. I placed them on the sticky Formica tabletop. The small clink of metal on plastic felt like the drop of a guillotine. Sandy's relief was a physical thing, a wave that washed over her, smoothing the lines of stress from her face. She snatched the keys before I could change my mind. "You're such a good sister," Mom whispered, her hand covering mine. Her touch felt cloying, a spider's web of false affection. "Always putting the family first." Dad nodded in solemn agreement. "This is what families do for each other." I nodded graciously, playing the part of the selfless martyr to perfection. I let them bask in their delusion, in the warmth of their twisted family values. They saw a defeated daughter, a pushover sister. They didn't see the predator hiding behind a sheepish smile. They didn't know I was already mentally reviewing the details of the comprehensive insurance policy I'd taken out on the car the week before, a policy with a very generous theft protection clause. But the insurance was just a safety net. The real plan was far more elegant. However, at 2 o'clock in the morning, the city was asleep. I sat alone in my car, a rental paid for with the last of my severance, in the desolate, sodium-lit parking lot of Sandy's storage unit facility. My laptop glowed in the darkness, bathing my face in a cold blue light. My real work was about to begin. For the past 2 weeks, I had encouraged Sandy to use my car for her business. I knew she was taking cash payments from her few remaining crystal healing clients to hide income from her lenders. I had even suggested she use the storage unit to meet them, citing privacy. What she didn't know was that the facility's security cameras, the ones I had researched meticulously, had a perfect, unobstructed view of the unit's entrance. And what she could never imagine was that my car had a secret passenger, a tiny, motion-activated spy camera I had hidden in the dashboard, recording every single undeclared cash transaction. My fingers trembled as I uploaded the final video file to the IRS whistleblower portal. Timestamps, license plates, crystal clear footage of cash changing hands inside my registered vehicle. I compiled it all into a neat, undeniable package of tax evasion. The satisfaction that coursed through my veins was a warm, intoxicating honey. It was the feeling of power, of justice, of control. I typed out a short, anonymous message. I believe a resident of this address is committing tax fraud using a vehicle registered to Sally Patterson. You may want to investigate. I hovered my finger over the mouse pad. This was it, the point of no return. With a final, satisfying click, I hit submit. The trap was set. The next morning, the fallout was more spectacular than I could have imagined. From my apartment window, which overlooked my parents' street, I had a perfect view. I was sipping my morning coffee when the boring, dark government sedan pulled up to their curb. A stern-faced man in an ill-fitting suit walked up the driveway and rang the doorbell. I watched as Sandy answered, still in her pajamas. I saw her take the official-looking envelope, her brow furrowed in confusion. I watched as she tore it open. Her face went from confusion to disbelief, then to chalk-white horror. Her scream was a thing of beauty. It pierced the quiet suburban morning, a raw, primal sound of pure panic. Mom burst out of the back door, gardening gloves still on, a trowel clutched in her hand. Dad came running from his workshop in the garage, sawdust clinging to his graying hair. They huddled around Sandy on the front lawn, a frantic tableau of chaos. Their panicked voices carried across the manicured grass as the reality of the official IRS audit notice began to sink in. Then, I saw the exact moment Dad's eyes fell on my Honda, parked right there in their driveway. The instrument of their ruin. His face went slack with a dawning, sickening dread. He looked from the car to the official letter, then back to the car. He finally understood. The car registered in my name, the one they had pressured me to loan to his precious daughter, had just implicated all of them. The phone call came just after midnight. I let it ring 3 times before answering, putting it on speaker. I was painting my nails a shade called Vengeance Red. "Sally, we need your help." Dad's voice crackled through the speaker. It was hoarse, stripped of its usual booming authority. It was the voice of a man drowning. "It's about Sandy, the IRS. They're talking about a criminal investigation, Sally. They think she was hiding tens of thousands of dollars." Mom's pathetic sobs provided the background percussion. "They could send her to prison," she wailed. "Listen to me," Dad cut in, his voice sharp with desperation. "Their whole case seems to be built around transactions that happened in your car. Her lawyer said that since it's registered to you, they might consider you an accomplice. The threat was clear. If she goes down, you're coming with her. It was their last, desperate gambit to control me." "Please, honey," Mom begged, her voice thick with tears. "You have to help her. Tell them you didn't know anything about it. Tell them she borrowed the car without your permission. Please, Sally, save your sister." I carefully painted my pinky finger, my hand as steady as a surgeon's. I let the silence stretch, savoring the sound of their ragged, panicked breathing. I let them hang in the abyss of their own making. Finally, I spoke, my voice a perfect symphony of innocence and quiet duty. "I understand," I said softly. "Don't worry. I'll do whatever's best for the family." My promise to do what's best for the family threw them into a state of hopeful confusion. They assumed I would lie to the IRS, perjure myself, and fall on my sword to save Sandy. They spent the next few days calling with frantic, whispered instructions, coaching me on the story we were all supposed to tell. I agreed to everything, my voice a soothing balm on their panicked nerves. Of course, I never contacted the IRS. I simply let the investigation I had initiated run its course. My car, now impounded as evidence, was their problem, not mine. The first loop of my revenge was complete, and they were dangling helplessly in the web I had woven. While they scrambled to find lawyers they couldn't afford, I turned my attention to the next villain on my list. Jessica. With my Stanford dream dead, I had pinned my last hopes on a prestigious merit scholarship at the local university where I was taking classes. My grades were perfect, my essay compelling. I was the ideal candidate. I was summoned to the office of the scholarship committee head, Professor Williams. The late afternoon sun slanted through the large window behind his mahogany desk, casting him in an almost saintly silhouette. His office smelled of old books, lemon polish, and a sickeningly sweet air of self-importance. He smiled with practiced paternal charm. "Sally, thank you for coming in." My heart, despite my new armor, gave a hopeful flutter. This was it, a lifeline. But then, "I'm afraid there's been a change," he said, his smile never faltering. "The committee has reconsidered its initial decision. We've decided to award the scholarship to another candidate." The air rushed out of my lungs. The hope died instantly, replaced by a cold, familiar dread. His fingers drummed lightly on a folder sitting on his desk. On the tab, in bold black letters, was Jessica's name. "I'm sure you understand," he continued, his tone smooth as silk. "Jessica's family has a long, generous history with our alumni board. In these trying economic times, her application was simply the more strategic choice." He wasn't even trying to hide the corruption. He was flaunting it. Through the window behind him, I could see the campus lawn, and parked on the curb was a gleaming red convertible. Leaning against it, scrolling on her phone, was Jessica. The sun glinted off the keys dangling from her perfectly manicured hand. She was waiting for him. This was their victory lap, the ultimate humiliation. The rage that filled me was white hot, but my face remained a placid mask. I rose slowly from my chair, my hands steady. I reached out and took the official rejection letter he was holding out to me. The paper felt slick and cold. "Of course, Professor," I said, my voice a quiet masterpiece of practiced humility. "Jessica is a wonderful candidate. She deserves every opportunity." The words tasted like ash in my mouth, but my smile never wavered. My gracious defeat seemed to please him. Behind him, I focused on a framed photograph on his bookshelf. It was Professor Williams, shaking hands with Jessica's father at last year's glitzy donor gala. The quid pro quo, immortalized in a silver frame. "Thank you for considering me," I said, my voice calm and even. "I'm sure I'll find another path." As I turned to leave, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I knew who it was from. I didn't have to look. I walked out of the office, past his secretary, and into the long, empty hallway. I pulled out my phone, a text from Jessica. "Sorry, babe, heard the news. May the best woman win." I stared at the smug little emoji, the casual cruelty of her message. The last flicker of doubt I had, the last shred of sentimentality, was extinguished forever. She had made a powerful enemy today, so had the professor. However, my shabby studio apartment became my war room. The blinds were drawn. The only light came from the glow of my laptop screen, reflecting in my focused eyes. My target, Professor Williams' email account. The university's cybersecurity was a joke. A few strategically crafted phishing emails sent from a dummy account disguised as IT alerts were all it took. He clicked the link without a second thought. I was in. For hours I sat there, a cold cup of coffee forgotten at my elbow. I scrolled through years of his digital life. It was a cesspool of academic fraud. I found everything. Quid pro quo arrangements trading grades for donations. Emails from wealthy parents begging for their children's failing marks to be reconsidered. Evidence of him selling advance copies of exams. Jessica's scholarship was just the tip of a massive, corrupt iceberg. He had been running this scam for years, preying on desperate students and rewarding the rich and connected. With methodical precision, I downloaded everything. Every email, every attachment, every altered grade sheet. I created a meticulously organized dossier of his crimes, a digital bomb that would vaporize his career. The next afternoon, I sat in the back corner of a dark downtown coffee shop, miles from the university. Rain streaked down the windows, blurring the city lights into an abstract watercolor of impending justice. Across the scarred wooden table sat Rachel Ives, an investigative journalist known for her tenacity and her hatred of institutional corruption. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, widened as she scrolled through the files on the tablet I'd provided. "This is explosive," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the mechanical grinding of the espresso machine. "If this is real—" "It's all real," I said, my voice low and steady. She looked up at me, her gaze piercing. "This is career-ending stuff, for him and for the students involved, but I need to verify it. I can't run a story based on an anonymous source's documents alone." I slid a small flash drive across the table. It clinked softly against her coffee cup. "Everything you need is on there," I said. financial records, bank transfers that correspond with the dates of altered grades, the university's own internal logs. I leaned forward slightly. Follow the money trail, Miss Ives. It leads exactly where you think it does. She picked up the flash drive, her expression a mixture of awe and journalistic hunger. She knew she was holding the biggest story of her year. The trap was set. Again, the reckoning came on a Thursday morning. The exposé dropped online, sending immediate and violent shockwaves through the university's ivory towers. The headline was devastating. Grades for gold. Corruption scandal rocks State University. By noon, Professor Williams was suspended pending a full investigation, escorted from his office by campus security. By evening, the university, in full panic and damage control mode, had revoked every single scholarship and grade change mentioned in the article. That included Jessica's. Her academic career, built on a foundation of lies and money, crumbled to dust in a single afternoon. I watched it all unfold from the campus coffee shop, the very one where Jessica had mocked me just days before. I sat in a comfortable armchair, sipping a celebratory latte, as the news played out on the large TV screen mounted to the wall. My phone, sitting on the table beside me, began to vibrate incessantly. Jessica, Professor Williams, Jessica's father, even my own parents, no doubt calling to ask if I'd heard the shocking news. Each call was a jolt of panic, a desperate plea from a sinking ship. They were reaching for me, the person they thought was powerless, to save them. I picked up the phone. I looked at Jessica's name flashing on the screen. Then, with a calm, steady finger, I pressed the button to decline the call. I did the same for the next call and the one after that. I let each one go to voicemail, silencing their terror with a simple touch. I took another sip of my latte, savoring the rich, warm flavor and the beautiful, chaotic symphony of their panic. My victory over Professor Williams and Jessica was short-lived. While Jessica's academic career was in flames and my parents were hemorrhaging money on Sandy's legal fees, my own situation was precarious. I was jobless, broke, and officially a university dropout. My enemies, though wounded, were not yet defeated. They saw my vulnerability as an opportunity for a final, crushing blow. The workplace, my last bastion of independence, was their next target. The sabotage I had foreseen at the end of that terrible week finally came to pass. Mrs. Henderson's office felt even smaller and more suffocating than before. The air was thick with the bitter smell of stale coffee and unvacuumed carpet. She couldn't meet my eyes. "I'm sorry, Sally," she said, her voice a nervous falter. "As you know, the company is restructuring the department. Your position, it's been eliminated." The termination paperwork sat on her desk, a pristine monument to her lie. I noticed the date on it had been backdated by a week, a petty, cowardly move to avoid paying me full severance. Through the thin walls, I could hear a peal of laughter from the break room. It was Jessica's laugh, sharp and triumphant. She had started the previous Monday, hired as a management trainee, despite having zero qualifications. The setup was complete. They had cut off my last lifeline. But then, I didn't rage, I didn't cry, I didn't beg. I gave Mrs. Henderson a single knowing look that made her flinch. Then I stood, turned, and walked out of her office. With methodical precision, I began to clean out my desk. I placed my favorite mug, a small potted succulent, and a handful of pens into a brown cardboard box. My movements were slow, dignified, and deliberate. Across the office floor, Jessica watched me, a smug, triumphant smirk plastered across her face. She leaned against what had been my cubicle just hours before, one hip cocked. She was a vulture enjoying her prize. "Good luck finding something else, Sally," she called out, her voice loud enough for the whole office to hear. It dripped with false sympathy. The job market is just so competitive these days. I paused. I looked up at her, and then my eyes drifted pointedly toward the small black dome of the security camera on the ceiling. I gave her a small, polite smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Thank you, Jessica," I said, my voice clear and calm. "I appreciate your concern." I shouldered my purse, picked up my box, and walked toward the exit without a backward glance. The security cameras captured every moment of my gracious professional departure. Jessica thought she had won. She thought this was the end of me. She had no idea I was already planning my countermove. However, that night, I met my former coworker, David, at a dingy 24-hour diner on the other side of town. The fluorescent lights buzzed aggressively overhead, casting a harsh glare on the cracked red vinyl of our booth. The air smelled of grease and bleach. David was a good man, a quiet accountant who had been with the company for 15 years. He'd always been kind to me, and he despised Jessica's unearned arrogance. He was my inside man. "You were right," he whispered, glancing around nervously before sliding a thick manila envelope across the table. It landed with a soft thud next to my water glass. "She's a thief." My heart began to beat a little faster. A cold, thrilling anticipation washed over me. "Jessica's been skimming from customer returns for months," David explained, his voice low. "Processing cash refunds for items that were never actually brought back, and pocketing the money. It's thousands of dollars." "And Mrs. Henderson?" I asked. David's expression soured. "Covering it up. Jessica's been dating her nephew for the last 6 months. Henderson's been fudging the inventory reports to hide the discrepancies." I opened the envelope. Inside was a treasure trove of damning evidence. Copies of altered receipts, the real inventory reports alongside the faked ones, and the crown jewel, printouts of security footage stills showing Jessica accessing the cash register long after closing, her face illuminated by the glow of the screen. The greed and stupidity of their little scheme was breathtaking. I looked up at David. "You've done the right thing," I murmured, sliding the envelope into my bag. He just nodded, his face pale with a mixture of fear and relief. "Just burn them to the ground, Sally." The die was cast. Jessica's greed had provided the perfect rope. I just needed to kick the chair out from under her. The next morning, I stood in the biting wind outside the downtown train station, the city rushing past me in a blur of oblivious commuters. I held the receiver of a payphone to my ear, the plastic cold against my skin. The corporate fraud hotline operator's voice was professionally neutral, devoid of emotion. "We take these matters very seriously, ma'am," she said as I calmly and anonymously detailed the embezzlement scheme, each allegation backed by the specific evidence David had provided. I sounded like just another concerned employee. "An internal investigation team will be dispatched to the location within 48 hours, she assured me, the sound of her typing punctuating her words. "Thank you," I said, and gently hung up the phone. I stood there for a moment, watching the waves of people flood past. They were all headed to their jobs, living their normal lives, completely unaware of the corporate drama I had just unleashed. A slow smile spread across my face. The clock was ticking for Jessica and Mrs. Henderson. The spectacular downfall happened on a Friday morning, exactly as I had calculated. I sat in the window seat of a small coffee shop directly across the street from my old workplace, a steaming cup of black coffee warming my hands. At 10:15 a.m., 2 sleek black sedans pulled up to the curb. 4 men and 2 women in sharp business suits emerged and entered the building with grim, focused expressions. The corporate investigators had arrived. For the next hour, I watched the barely contained chaos unfold through the large storefront windows. Employees gathered in shocked, whispering clusters. I could imagine the panic, the confusion, the dawning horror. Then, at 11:30 a.m., the front doors opened again. Jessica was the first one out, escorted by one of the investigators. She wasn't smirking now. Her face was pale as death, her eyes wide with terror and disbelief. She was in handcuffs. Her designer heels clicked a frantic, desperate rhythm against the pavement, a funeral march for her entire future. Mrs. Henderson followed 20 minutes later, her face crumpled in defeat, sobbing openly as she was led to the second car. As if on cue, a local news van, tipped off by an anonymous email I'd sent an hour earlier, screeched to a halt. Cameras started rolling, capturing every humiliating moment of their perp walk for the evening broadcast. My phone, sitting silently on the table, began to buzz. And buzz. And buzz. Frantic messages from former coworkers, panicked texts from my parents, an unreadable number of missed calls from family friends. "Have you seen the news? OMG, Sally, is this because of you? Call me now." I picked up the device. I looked at the cascade of notifications, a digital tidal wave of their shock and fear. Then, with a calm, steady hand, I held down the power button and turned the phone off. I took a long, slow sip of my coffee, the bitter taste a perfect counterpoint to the sweet, satisfying scene unfolding across the street. My attention was already on the horizon, where justice met the promise of my next victory. With my phone turned off, the world fell blissfully silent. The symphony of panic I had conducted was still playing, but I had left the concert hall. The arrests of Jessica and Mrs. Henderson were the talk of the town, a satisfying public humiliation that served as the perfect conclusion to the third loop of my revenge. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. I had systematically dismantled every immediate threat, every person who had wronged me. My family was mired in legal battles I had orchestrated. My supposed best friend's future was in ashes, and my former boss was facing prison time. I was finally free, or so I thought. A few days later, a thick, cream-colored envelope arrived at my dingy apartment. It bore the insignia of the most powerful law firm in the city. There was no return address, only my name, written in elegant calligraphy. My heart hammered against my ribs. Had one of my enemies found a new way to attack me? With trembling fingers, I opened it. Inside was a single heavy card. Miss Patterson, we are the executors of the estate of your grandmother, Eleanor Patterson. It is imperative you meet with us at your earliest convenience. My grandmother? I had only vague childhood memories of a stern, quiet woman who smelled of lavender and old books. She had passed away years ago. A cold knot of apprehension formed in my stomach. I had a feeling my life was about to change forever. However, the law office of Chen and Sterling was on the top floor of the city's tallest skyscraper. It was a world of hushed tones, gleaming marble, and floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the skyline like a masterpiece. The air smelled of success. Attorney Margaret Chen was a vision of power in a dark Armani suit. Her expression was sharp, intelligent, and held a hint of something I couldn't quite place. Amazement, perhaps even reverence. "Miss Patterson," she began, her voice smooth and commanding. "I have been your grandmother's executor for 30 years, and in all that time, I have never seen anything quite like this." My hands, resting in my lap, began to tremble. She slid a heavy, leather-bound portfolio across the vast mahogany desk. "Your grandmother, Eleanor Patterson, wasn't just wealthy," she said, her eyes boring into mine. "She was one of the most powerful and discreet venture capitalists on the West Coast." My mind struggled to process her words. The quiet, lavender-scented woman I barely remembered was a tycoon? "And for the last 18 years," Margaret Chen continued, "she has been watching you." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "She's been testing you, Sally, through a complex network of associates and investments she controlled from the shadows." The coffee cup on the table beside me rattled in its saucer as a tremor ran through my entire body. My revenge, my calculated rage, none of it had been happening in a vacuum. I had an audience. The next stop was a private bank vault that felt colder than a tomb. The bank manager, a man with sweat beading on his forehead, could barely speak as he presented the account statements. His hands shook. $57 million, he confirmed, his voice a reverent whisper. The numbers on the page seemed to swim, impossible and dreamlike. "Plus," he added, swallowing hard, "controlling interest in 16 different companies." He read from a list. My blood ran cold. The retail chain that had fired me. The company that held my parents' mortgage. The largest private donor to the university's scholarship fund. He then produced a key and opened a large safety deposit box. The cool, dry air that wafted out smelled of old money and even older secrets. Inside, there was no jewelry, no bonds. There were photographs of my grandmother, a formidable woman with eyes just like mine, mentoring a who's who of Fortune 500 CEOs. There were handwritten letters detailing her profound disappointment in my parents' weakness and their cruel, baffling favoritism toward Sandy. And at the very bottom lay a thick, sealed envelope. On the front, in my grandmother's elegant script, were 3 words. "For Sally's revenge." A sob escaped my lips, a raw, ragged sound of vindication. I wasn't just a vengeful girl. I was an heiress carrying out a legacy. My rage had been sanctioned. But then, My grandmother's business manager, a whip-smart woman named Victoria Sterling, spread a series of architectural blueprints across a conference table that overlooked the entire city. "These weren't coincidences, Sally," she said, her voice crisp and clear. She used a red pen to draw lines connecting dots on a city map. "Eleanor owned the holding company that served as your sister's business landlord. She held your parents' mortgage through a subsidiary firm. She even had a controlling stake in the parent company of the diner where you handed over your car keys." The web she revealed was staggering, a breathtaking display of invisible power. Every betrayal, every slight, every moment they had chosen Sandy over me. My grandmother had known. She had watched it all unfold through her vast network. "These weren't random acts of cruelty," Victoria said, her eyes filled with a fierce loyalty. "They were tests to see if you had her strength, her resilience, her fire." She capped the pen and looked at me. "Tests you passed brilliantly." The weight of this inherited power settled on my shoulders, not as a burden, but as a silk cloak, tailor-made just for me. The final revelation took place in my grandmother's mansion, a sprawling stone estate I never knew she owned. Victoria led me to a library with soaring ceilings, filled with thousands of books. In the center of the room, positioned to catch the afternoon light, was a magnificent, ornate antique mirror with a silver frame. "She called it her truth glass," Victoria explained softly, polishing the frame with a careful, reverent hand. I peered into the glass, expecting to see my own reflection. Instead, the image wavered, shimmering like a heat haze, before resolving into a crystal-clear scene. I saw Sandy pacing frantically in a small, barren apartment, her face gaunt with terror as she screamed into a phone. The image shifted. I saw Jessica, sobbing in a bleak holding cell, her perfect manicure chipped and ruined. It shifted again. My parents were in their kitchen, screaming at each other while a pile of eviction notices lay scattered on the counter between them. I could hear their words as if I were standing in the room. "Eleanor claimed it showed her the hearts of people," Victoria said, her voice filled with awe. "Their true intentions. She used it to build her fortune and to protect the people she loved from those who would exploit them." I reached out a trembling hand, my fingertips hovering just above the glass. This wasn't just an inheritance of money and power. It was an inheritance of something more. Something impossible. Armed with near infinite resources, a web of corporate influence, and a supernatural mirror that showed me the truth, I began to implement the final phase of my grandmother's grand design. The time for quiet, reactive revenge was over. The era of strategic revolution had begun. From my new penthouse office, the city spread out below me like a chessboard. But I was no longer a pawn. I discovered I'd been playing with all the queens the entire time. A single phone call to a board member shifted an entire corporate policy overnight. A few clicks on my laptop initiated a hostile takeover of the company that held my parents' debt. Legal maneuvers, drafted by the best lawyers money could buy, activated dormant clauses in contracts my family had signed without a second thought. The transformation was absolute. It was intoxicating. From forgotten daughter to avenging angel, from powerless victim to the architect of their ruin, from a girl who had lost everything to the inevitable force of nature who now controlled it all.